The royal family has always misbehaved, but they've done so behind layers of privacy that has now been obliterated, does not exist anymore. The deference has gone, the religious idea of monarchy has gone. They're facing a terminal crisis.
The crisis, if you like, is way out of their control. I think we'll look back at today, the day that Andrew was arrested, as a real turning point. I mean, it is a member of the royal family, as we sit here, is in a cell.
The same police force that has arrested him is looking into much more serious allegations, arguably, about the trafficking of women. Are we approaching a point where this is not recoverable? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has been arrested, and his brother, the King, says the police have his full and wholehearted support and that the law must take its course. So what happens next for Andrew and the Crown? Is this the biggest crisis the royal family has faced in modern history? The King says it would not be right to comment further on the matter, but how long will he be able to hold that line? Joining me today, the historian Dan Snow, and David Yelland, the former editor of The Sun, is joining us on Zoom. David, let's begin with you, because you work in public relations as well. I mean, is this the biggest crisis the monarchy has ever faced in modern times, and can they survive it?
I think this is a very bad day in a series of very bad days. I think there are going to be a lot more bad days if this goes to court, and I don't think people have really got their heads around that yet. And yes, Krishnan, I think this is the worst crisis since the abdication. Yeah.
Dan, when was the last time a prince was arrested?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that. I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to crunch it. I think it was probably the Duke of Monmouth, who was the son of the acknowledged, albeit illegitimate son of Charles II, launched an uprising against his uncle James II and was arrested and tried and executed in 1685. And despite the best efforts of many, many Georgian princes and some of Queen Victoria's two kids, they have managed to keep out of the prison cell. So I think it really is. Usually when people say things are unprecedented, they're usually quite precedented. But this is really extraordinary, really extraordinary.
I mean, David, when you say this is going to get worse, you have to think about where an arrest leads if it goes to a criminal case, and who the other witnesses might be, who else might be questioned. We're talking about people in government, people in the palace, possibly Sarah Ferguson, goodness knows who else, possibly the King.
Journalists like ourselves have been around a few years. We're used to this, but I don't think the public is yet. And I think what we're going to see, what's going to happen is it will go quiet for a bit, because that's what happens should there be charges, for example. This is now an active case, so it might dip, but then it will come back, and it will come back in the most forensic and reputationally damaging way that you can possibly have, which is, if it happens, a criminal court case, as you say, Krishnan, with people that normally don't talk, that have spent their entire lives not talking publicly except when they want to. People like Sarah Ferguson and members of the royal family and people in and around, and much more importantly, to my mind, the staff, the people at the palace. What did they know? And when did they know it? And they will be asked that. And I think this is, we don't know how bad this is because we don't know what's actually going to come out. It's the real truth of the matter. But you know what? Neither does the palace.
Right. But do you think their public line can hold? But that's it. They've said they support the investigation.
No.
And that's it.
Well, I do this podcast on the BBC called When It Hits the Fan. And I've been saying for weeks there that actually what you might call the tactical PR of the palace has got very good in recent weeks. They react in real time to the news. So today we've seen two statements. We've seen a statement from Buckingham Palace, a statement from Kensington Palace, and they haven't just said we can't comment because there's an ongoing case. They have said that they would. I haven't got the exact words in front of me, but basically they are concerned about the allegations and they will continue to cooperate and so on. That's okay, but really the crisis, if you like, is way out of their control now because they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know how bad this is. And we are possibly going to see the King, because obviously every prosecution in the UK is in the King's name, the King having to prosecute his own brother. I mean, that would be a truly extraordinary thing. And I think also we have to think about, these statements work. I think they work for people like us. People, we've been around a bit. We know that really the powers can't say much more and they're trying their best. But for younger generations and for the rest of the world, they just see Epstein and Andrew and Virginia Giuffre arrest, court case, locked up at the moment. And it can't get worse. That is just reputationally devastating. And that's what the world sees. And I really think there's a risk, question that within the media, we don't see actually how the rest of the world and people under the age of, say, 40 are seeing this and what they think about this.
Dan, how do you think this translates to the public? Also bearing in mind that in America, they don't have any of the deference to the royal family we do, and you've got politicians out there demanding everybody gives evidence.
Yeah, well, I was struck by what David said. In a series of bad days, this is the worst day. The problem is the royal family have been taking hits since the invention of the sort of the modern news media, let alone the internet, the annihilation of distance, the intimacy, the destruction of privacy. It was all they've just been below. I grew up with toe sucking, and I grew up with phone recordings. This is, as Dave, this has just been a attritional sort of First World War like trench warfare this family's been involved in. And I think if you really scale it right back, what is the point of the monarchy? Well, 1,000 years ago, the point of the monarchy is they're going to protect you from the guy coming over the beach. They're going to protect your farm from being burned and your kids from being enslaved, right? So that's gone. We don't have that anymore. So then the monarchy invented this new idea, which is the idea of this sort of soft power, a family that can exist above the fray, above the petty squabbles, above the little things that you and I do every day, trying to earn a buck, trying to get ahead. They don't need all that. They got the jewelry and the medals, the palace. So instead, they're going to shape best behavior and manners. They're going to do good works and bring attention to things. But that doesn't work if you know that members of the family are flogging state secrets to foreign agents. It doesn't work if they're behaving atrociously in their personal life. And so it's the combination of those two things. The royal family has always misbehaved, but they've done so behind layers of privacy that has now been obliterated, does not exist anymore. The deference has gone, the religious idea of monarchy is gone. So we are happy to report and share those things, which would have sunk Edward VII when he was a young man. It would have sunk George IV when he was a young man. William IV was getting in brawls the whole time when he was young. That stuff that happened behind closed doors. So that's gone. And now they're even undermining this sort of idea of what this family. If they're just like the rest of us, just trying to make a buck, trying to buy a ski chalet by flogging stuff they come across their desk, then what is the point?
What we don't know.
We don't know
is.
I just want to say
the allegation is that emails were being passed about forthcoming trips in his role as a trade envoy, and then reports of what had happened on those trips. I suppose so. We've got to be careful about words like flogging, because we don't know whether there was anything
commercially sensitive
in return. But that is just where this begins. So this is a lot worse than sex scandals of the past or divorces, because this is criminality potentially, and also the same police force that has arrested him is looking into much more serious allegations, arguably, about the trafficking of women into this country for Andrew to have sex with. Are we approaching a point where this is not recoverable? And that it goes far deeper than Andrew, because the questions will pile up now about what the king ever knew. The king can't give evidence in a court case for the reasons David has said, because the king brings the prosecution. It also makes us think about the role of the Queen. Yeah. Well, the late Queen.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything's recoverable. The British royal family have come back from the most astonishing problems before. But by the same token, it's also, everything is, I think, more volatile. We know from our political partisanship, we are a lot less, we are happier to change positions when it comes to voting. We were seeing this on either flank of the political party situation at the moment. So we are less, I think there's less ballast. I think there's less oh, well, we've had this system for 300 years, let's not get it. And there's a sense, like with Scottish independence, that you just need to get 50% plus one on one day. And I think that's a real danger for the royal family, that it doesn't need to be a kind of world historic, seismic, slow process. It can just get really bad for a short enough period where something, all it takes is a Jeremy Corbyn to get into office or something like that. And then then they're facing a terminal crisis.
David, what do you make of how we're going to look at Queen Elizabeth through this now as well? I mean, throughout all the scandals and all the, the horrible years, she was the one who was unimpeachable. There may have been missteps, but by and large, she was respected and loved. Aren't people going to reassess that now and say, what did she know? Was she involved in the payment to Virginia Giuffre, and why?
We know that it's been widely reported that Prince Andrew that was paid up to £12 million to Virginia Giuffre, and we know that a large chunk of that money came from the Queen. And it is true that people in the palace are extremely concerned that this could affect her reputation. And I noticed that Tim Montgomery on X this morning posted, thank God the Queen's gone, because this would have been very difficult for her. And it's interesting, if you look at that, the response to that post from particularly younger people was all about Virginia Giuffre. And this is what I mean about, I think, younger people, particularly women, but not just women, see this as a cover-up of abuse. And you can never recover from that, and quite right too. And in institutions, it's look at what's happened to the BBC post Jimmy Savile and so on. I'm not making comparisons between Jimmy Savile and Prince Andrew. What I'm saying is that type of crisis is of a whole different nature to a normal reputational crisis. If it turns out, and if this goes to court, and if it emerges, and I suspect it will, that there are many people, including the police protection people, that knew things. Go back to the Emily Maitlis interview in Newsnight 2019. Clear that many of the things said in that interview were untrue. I mean, it's undisputed now. How many people in the palace knew? How many people sat at home and watched that interview and knew that wasn't true and didn't do anything about it? And how senior were they? And did that include members of the royal family? At the moment, we don't know the answers, but if a court case gives us those answers, then I think the institution could really be damaged. I mean, really be damaged. I agree with Dan, everything is recoverable, but I detect, with the Prince and Princess of Wales, it's almost as if some of the things they say and do, you wonder whether they've lost the fight, actually, whether they actually want the royal family as it exists now to continue. I'm not sure that they want the royal family to continue, but I think in a slimmed down version. I think the upshot from all this may well be a very severely damaged institution, sadly with a lot of illness at the moment as well, which is another factor. And in the future, as these things roll out, we have a smaller royal family that's entirely different in nature to the one that we see now. I think we'll look back at today, the day that Andrew was arrested, as a real turning point. I mean, it is a member of the royal family, as we sit here, is in a cell.
Or a police station, at least. Yes, I mean, and again, I think for both fairness and legal necessity, I need to say that Andrew has not been found guilty of anything and denies all the allegations against him. But something has clearly changed, Dan, which is that throughout all these years of allegations, the police didn't move. And the police didn't mount an investigation. And us and other news organizations were going to them and saying, well, what about the flights? And what about these allegations? Why aren't you investigating? And, the word just came back, there is no investigation. The King spoke some days ago, or issued a statement, saying that they were they stood ready to assist the Thames Valley Police. And then the Prime Minister a few days later said, nobody is above the law. I mean, these are signals, presumably.
Yes, I wonder. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I think that, but I also think that when you publish your inbox, it's pretty tough to get away from, when it's in black and white and it's not rumor, it's not unsubstantiated. I mean, it's now there for people to read, and it just gets harder to ignore and sideline. But I think you're right, something's changed, not just in the last few days, and I'd love to know more about that. What has also changed, and this is reasons to be hopeful, if you like, which is that it shows that our democracy's changed, our concept of ourselves as a nation has changed, which is, the Queen's uncle was allegedly reasonably badly behaved. Certainly, as I said, Edward VII behaved dreadfully and was enmeshed in the justice system to a certain extent and had to be removed from that. So in the 19th century, but this is an example of, albeit delayed, but this is an example of a citizen of this country being taken into custody like anybody else, being treated the same as anyone else. So sometimes when bad things look like they're happening in democracy, bad things never look like they're happening in totalitarian states until the whole thing collapses. When bad things happen in democracy, it's because we are not shy of them, we're not afraid of them. And I think it does say something about Britain arguably moving towards a different place, different relationship with the royals, certainly, but different idea of ourselves.
Do we know whether in history, I'm talking about the last couple of hundred years, I suppose, whether the royals were in fact protected by authority?
Absolutely. William IV was in a brawl, got let out as soon as they found out who he was. There's just simply no. Yes, they were protected.
Yes,
they still are to a degree. I mean, obviously, I don't put it at the top of my CV anymore, but I was editor of the Sun for 5 years, and there were a number of times during my editing years when we didn't run stories about senior members of the royal family, and that still happens now. And I'm not going to say what they are, obviously, but the royal family are still protected by the British press. There is still a relation, not all the time, but there are rules, unwritten rules. I completely agree with what you've just said about Dan, about the UK. It contrasts so much with the US at the moment. We've Peter Mandelson has been investigated. Andrew has been investigated. There are consequences in this country to doing things that are wrong. I know these are alleged crimes and we don't know yet, but there are consequences. No matter who you are, the police come knocking. That does not happen in the US at the moment, and even if it does, the president will just wipe the slate clean later. And I think the contrast between what's happening in America and Britain, it makes me feel quite proud to be British. And I'm not someone that rolls myself on a flag regularly, but I am quite, I completely agree. There are some positives here too.
People will be intrigued by the idea that stories weren't run. Can you just, without saying what they were, why weren't they run? Who would decide to bury them and why?
Well, when I was editing The Sun was selling 3.8 million copies. It was much, much bigger than it is now. And you would have to as an editor, you would have to, in conjunction with your proprietor and so on, work out whether running certain news stories would sell more copies or lose you copies. And I don't want to go into mistakes I made, but I did make mistakes, and I apologise for them at the time, and lost a lot of sales sometimes. And those were relatively small beer.
So it was about readers not liking this stuff rather than a sort of an establishment cover-up.
Yeah, the question is, this is really before social media. The question was, do the readers want to read this? Do they want to read this, or would they rather not read this? And that still happens now, bizarrely. So there are many rumors and things about members of the royal family you can see on social media or in the US, and I'm in the US a lot, and I read things there that I don't read in the UK. And most people in this country may. I'm not saying these rumors are true. I'm just saying the idea that the British press just print anything about the royal family is not true. Wasn't true then, and it's not true now.
But then let's go to William and Kate, because their statements have been much lower level than the King's. Their statements so far have been about their concern for women and girls, and they haven't really engaged beyond that. Are they slipping behind? Do they need to engage with what's going on, or are they right to keep a distance?
I think they probably want to keep a distance, don't they? They must be just desperate. You spend your life trying to do good works and shape good behaviors and all those things, and then you are dragged, things totally outside your control sort of drag you back into these discussions like the one we're having now.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the amazing things that they have done, no doubt, in their own, their own philanthropic and charitable lives recently. So it must be, it's a brutal tightrope they're walking.
David, what do you make of the way they are handling it, given William could be king pretty soon?
We haven't mentioned Prince Harry, and I think that's a factor that we should just throw into the mix here. He is, of course, in court this week against the owners of the Daily Mail, and has chosen to really leave the royal family and live in the US, as we know. That affects, I think, a lot of the way that they communicate. But I think on this issue, it is more a case of them wanting to align with Buckingham Palace, align with the king, but play second fiddle. And they are, second fiddle. I mean, that's the way the royal family works. So I don't think there's anything surprising, actually, in the way that they have communicated. I think it's been fine, and I think it's fine today. But I do think, as I said earlier, that you can see, if you read between the lines, where we're going with this, which is just trying. I think they want to try and be a relatively ordinary family, which is of course a very, very difficult task to pull off, because they're not.
But doesn't it also sort of accelerate what William has been talking about, which is he wants change? I mean, we have very little sense of what change he actually means. But in his last interview about how he wants to change the monarchy, which was on Apple TV with a Hollywood star, Eugene, he sort of hinted that he wanted a modernized and changed royal family. Isn't he going to have to accelerate that pretty quickly if his uncle is facing criminal charges?
It's really interesting, because even that interview, there was a degree of deference there. And as Dan was alluding to or saying earlier, if deference disappears entirely, what is there left? I mean, that is the real problem for them. And I think that, it's very difficult to maintain deference if you go for a smaller scale Dutch, ordinary sort of European style monarchy. And I also think, and I'm going to go back to what I was saying earlier, I think the link with Epstein and these allegations about abuse of young women and worse are really damaging. I think are damaging for all generations, but I think for the younger generations, if you look at the numbers, the royal family's approval ratings amongst younger people have never been worse, and I think this is one of the reasons why.
I love this idea of the stripped down monarchy is always very fun, because they talk about change. No one seems to be talking about change in their kind of constitutional, legal position, perhaps financial position. It always seems to be about bulleting uncles. I mean, it's like, slim down. That's what we need, slim down. Yeah. But I mean, we're not in Mughal India. You can't just, or the Ottoman Empire. You can't strangle the extraneous members of the family. I've never seen a case that somehow this changed monarchy. I don't know what it looks like as an institution, other than please, can we ignore royal cousins and uncles? And I feel sorry for Prince Louis, because he looks like he's on the ski jump. But it's this. Is it just that? No one other than the king, queen, and the heir should sort of have any attention? I mean, what is this new plan? I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, and it's worth reminding people that Andrew is still 8th in line to the throne, which is just bizarre and extraordinary. I mean, doesn't it look as though the king, in his statements, though, is basically saying, "Okay, you can have him."
Totally.
He's the sacrificial lamb to save the monarchy.
Yeah.
Yes, after a very bad start, though. I mean, they've only caught up recently. Their communications and what they're saying now are good. And as I've said earlier, and said on when it hits the fan, they are reacting in real time now, which is why we've seen 2 statements today. And the idea that they put out 2 statements in 24 hours, just hours after the police turned up at 8 o'clock this morning, in a previous life in a previous era, would never have happened. If the Queen was still a queen, we wouldn't have seen any of this. So, but the problem is, if you are now treating your communications like a government department or a company, you've got to keep it up. You cannot say no comment. You've got to react, and therefore, whatever happens, they have to react. So you know, the royal family is in modern times survived because of this sort of thin veneer, this sort of gossamer veneer, that we can see who they are and we can see all their faults, but we don't really want to look through the gossamer. We just want to, you know, we will salute and we'll carry on. And I'm not sure that exists anymore. And as soon as that gossamer veneer, or whatever you want to call it, the shield between us and them, once that's lifted, what's left?
I mean, isn't the other aspects of this, which I think particularly the young people on social media, you know, are appalled by, is that the way these stories play out, whether it's Andrew or Mandelson or any of the other things, they turn in the media into sort of institutional stories, scandal stories, and the biggest scandal of the last 100 years is this extraordinary network of exploitation of women and children that was going on by the rich and powerful and sometimes famous. And that keeps getting buried by the latest element of scandal. And that if this spreads beyond misconduct in public office to the question, you know, and the allegations that Thames Valley Police are also investigating about trafficking, you know, we keep saying it's as bad as it gets. That's as bad as it gets, because that is the worst scandal in our modern history. Right, you know, forget the politics.
It is, and I don't think we are anywhere near the end of this. In fact, I think we're in, you know, we're halfway through a volume of, you know, it's a 3-volume novel, and we're halfway through the first volume, because this is about the powerless and the powerful, and it is the people that are forgotten are the people like Virginia Giuffre, who took her own life. And there are many others like that. And the public can see that. And it's really interesting what you just said, Krishnan, because I think the media, of which we're all a part, really, the way the media handles these is that we convert them into institutional stories. We look at it from the perspective of government, Downing Street, the White House, the palace, whereas the public look at it from the point of view of the victims.
Exactly.
And quite right too. And therefore, powerful people around the world. I mean, what's happened here? The New York Times has been brilliant. There's a brilliant columnist in the New York Times, I forget his name, who says that the Epstein emails are really important because they show us how the uber powerful talk to each other when they don't think we're looking. And they're absolutely right. The arrogance, the entitlement, and there's going to be big consequences for this, massive consequences, and we're only at the beginnings of it.
But it's interesting, David, listening to you, because this is a crisis. But the reason it's delayed, the reason no one did anything, is because the social ideas, our culture is changing very fast, right? So now, the 30, 40, 100 years ago, the idea that Prince Andrew would be brought down by having sex with a 17-year-old, allegedly, and but that fact, just people would laugh at you. That what would have brought the monarchy down is getting divorced, having sex with someone in a same-sex relationship. End of. Right now, ironically, that's why this sort of institution is just reeling, because society, and we see it in our own families. We see it talking to our grandparents about race, about climate, about gender relation, all that kind of stuff. These things are now, as you say, that would be the worst crisis in the history of the family. But 40 years ago, that wasn't a crisis. That, dare I say, was the norm. It was assumed that rich, powerful men were going to seek out young women to have sex with.
And it also makes you wonder whether, if this is the beginning of some kind of downfall of the elite, whether we are also at the beginning of quite a big social shift.
Yeah, we're wondering where these huge shifts, where do they end? And at the end of the day, you can find yourself on the wrong side of history. You know, only 10, 20, 30 years passes, and you go from being a good lad to being a criminal.
David Yelland, Dan Snow, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of the Fourcast. We'll be back very soon. Bye-bye.